Episode 2.
Welcome to another freaking bourbon show.
Another freaking bourbon show.
I'm Chip Wooten.
Travis Jones.
And this is another freaking bourbon show. We're just going to sit here.
We're going to say this over and over.
Yeah, every time.
It's a freaking bourbon show.
Yeah. All right. Before we even get into any of this, go click right down here.
It's like right.
Literally, there's a button right here.
There.
It says
click
subscribe.
It. Like, it's not hard to do.
It's
Just
red.
click the button.
Click it. There's
I don't like subscribing to shows. I don't, but like we want you to subscribe to this one. So just like get over it for 1 second.
So like
hit the subscribe button for like 1 second.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, totally.
Like I don't subscribe to a ton of shows, but subscribe to this one. There's bird shit on this table. That's fun.
There you go. This is the episode that you want to send to all your friends that are bourbon newbies. Or
it's a noob episode.
The noob episode. We're gonna poon some noobs in this. Is that
that's
just
something you just made up? And it.
No. Poon and noobs. That's what you do in.
Poon and noobs.
Yeah, that's what you do in like Call of Duty and video games and stuff like that. You poon noobs.
It's been a while since I've been Call of Duty.
Oh well.
I don't know these things.
There we are.
I'm old. Here's the thing. Everything that I had to learn over, a good solid 2 years. I wish there was just some type of video I could have watched right off the bat. Two idiots could have told me exactly what I need to know about bourbon. That's what this is.
So
if you're new, watch this video. Pay attention. Watch it twice. If you're a master at bourbon, watch this video, save it, and send to all your noob friends. Let's be honest. I have sent 1 million emails, 2 million texts of things that you should do when it comes to bourbon. This video solves that.
Save this with your bourbon noob friends, and the next time they're at tasting, maybe they won't fill up your entire glass with George T. Stagg.
We've seen it happen.
We've seen it.
It's rough. You hate to see it.
Yeah.
Luckily, it wasn't my bottle.
That's right. Yeah, if you drink with people who are very well versed in the world of bourbon and you come in as a newbie and you try and play the part, you're going to get sniffed out really, really fast.
It's not good. It's not a good look.
It is a whole lot better to go in there and explain on the front end, hey, I don't really know what I'm doing. Please lead me in the right direction. But if you pay attention to this video, hopefully you'll be a little bit more prepared going into that situation.
I wish I were more prepared.
No,
I was a noob.
Yeah.
Number 1.
Yeah.
What is bourbon?
Let's talk about some of the things that people believe are rules of bourbon, but they're not. One is that it has to be made in Kentucky.
Wrong.
America.
There are a few rules that have to happen in order for it to be actually called a bourbon.
It has to be at least 51% corn in your mash bill, which mash bill is basically liquor process. You take all of your ingredients that go into making your distillate, or you throw yeast in there. Some love starts happening. It starts smelling like bread, and it's fantastic.
You go like Makers and you stick your finger in.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna do that on Monday.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I'm doing a barrel pick on Monday.
Why don't I get invited to these?
Nobody likes you.
Damn it.
I'm very likable. I'm very likable.
I gotta get more friends.
Yeah, so it's got to be 51% corn.
51% corn.
And then it has to be in new charred oak, American oak casks. It's got to be American oak. It can't be French oak.
If it's already been used, can be used again.
That's correct.
So it's not. It's like kind of like brewing tea. Like once you pull the tea bags out, you can't put them back in tea again because it's just not going to get the same consistency. So that barrel's got to go. New barrel comes in.
That's right. Also has to be aged for at least 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's when my voice went up like that, it sounded like I was asking you a question. I kind of was because I've forgotten.
I'm gonna agree.
It has to be aged for 2 years. We should probably cover what it means to be bottled in bond.
What it really means to you when you see bottle and bond now, it means it's 100 proof. That's really essentially what you're looking at.
So the primary purpose of the Bottled and Bond Act of 1897 is to guarantee that the product the consumer was buying was really whiskey according to a standardized definition. The act requires the spirit to be a product of one distillation season and one distiller at one distillery. So for example, one of the more common ones is, Old Fitzgerald Bottled and Bond. It's all at Heaven Hill. It's all made at Heaven Hill, and it's all kept in the same warehouse and it's not moved. So that way it can be overseen. And then it also has to be aged for no less than 4 years.
Number 3. Types of bourbon. We've got to talk about the types of bourbon. We got to talk about, okay, when you go into an actual store and you see a wall full of stuff, it's a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
And you see things like barrel strength. You see things like rye. You see things like weeded.
Well, it's small batch.
Small batch.
Single barrel.
Barrel finished.
Full
All kinds
proof.
of stuff. Let's start with batch.
And let's start with batch proof. So batch proof means that you have a bunch of barrels that all have the same distillate in them. Yep. They're all then mixed together, and then you have a small batch, right? So it's a mixture of those, and they're really trying to key in, the distiller's really trying to key in on a certain flavor profile.
Correct.
So that it's consistent.
That's the hardest thing to do. When you think about, you get a bottle this year, and then you get one next year, and you get the one the year following after that, it all tastes the same. Think about mixing all of these barrels together, which those barrels do not taste the same. Mm-hmm. They really don't. It's a mixture process. It's an art to get it to taste the exact same way. It's pretty impressive, actually. Yeah. That's why those guys make a lot of money. So.
The majority of the time that you have something that is a batch, there's also going to be, it's going to be what's called cut, which means they're going to add water to it.
Correct.
That is then going to proof it down.
Let's put it this way. Every time you put ice in a bourbon that is 80 proof, it's probably started at like, what, about 130 proof? Mm-hmm. And they've watered that down to 80 proof, and then you're putting ice in it to water it down even more than that. So if people are asking all the time, should I put ice in my bourbon? That's essentially what you're doing. I'm not trying to tell you not to do it. I'm just telling you what's happening when you do that.
So I love to use the Weller collection to talk about this because it's something that people are really familiar with. So this would be a small batch right here.
Correct.
This is 90 proof.
Batch proof every year. Correct.
Yep. Consistent.
Watered down.
Consistent. Correct. If you drink this year, next year, the goal is for them to get this as close to tasting the same year after year as possible. This is also going to be batch, but this is going to be a 12-year, so it's going to be aged longer. Maybe we're going to have some richer flavors. It's still going to be proof down, though. So it's much higher proof coming off the still.
True.
Much higher proof going into the barrels. And then once it comes out of the barrels, it's batched together, and then it's proof down.
Yep. Now we move into the...
Yeah, so 107, still...
Antique 107.
Still going to be usually batch if you're just buying it off the shelf. This one in particular is actually a 107 single barrel.
So you see this little sticker right here.
You can tell that by the single barrel. A local store here in Nashville actually did this pick.
Let's talk about like what that really means, though, for like a tasting perspective. So OWA, and I say OWA, I'm using acronyms here. We're going to get into that in just a second. That's Old Weller Antique, and just so you know. Old Weller Antique has a common, consistent flavor every single year. But when it comes to a store pick, it comes to a single barrel store pick, the differences you're going to see a lot of times are some of the palate profiles that you see. You know, whereas you see the batch proof has a very consistent flavor, this has notes of cherry that the batch proof would not have, which makes it a lot more fun to try out. And you say, hey, this is completely different.
And next in the Weller line is full proof.
114 proof.
I think...
Which I think is what's interesting. Is it
full
says
proof means
full
that
proof, but it's not necessarily barrel strength, because everything in full proof is 114.
Is 114 what Weller goes into the barrel at?
There's no way. It can't be that consistent across the board.
It's worth remembering that this means it's been proofed down to a standard strength through the
there it is.
Water evaporation.
This guy is still watered down just a hair to 114 proof.
This William LaRue is part of what's called the Buffalo Trace Antique Collection. Includes things like William LaRue Weller, George T. Stagg, Thomas Handy, a 17-year Eagle Rare, an 18-year Sazerac.
Which is your favorite?
So if you hear somebody say, I like anything that's a BTAC, that's what they're talking about, is something from that collection.
As a noob, I feel like you should go into a store, you should try a rye, you should try a weeded bourbon. You just ask the store clerk there, you know, like, what do you think is great? And we could give you our opinions on that too, but really, you know, like, I know Chip's all about a weeded bourbon. It's a little sweeter, sometimes, it depends. A young weeded bourbon for me is not good. I'm kind of weird on weeded. Ryes, some people hate ryes, some people love ryes. They're typically spicy. But they also have this very different kind of intricate flavor to it. It's just not like a typical bourbon. Like a Pikesville, if you haven't, you're starting out, Pikesville is a great ride.
I've heard good stuff about that.
That's a Heaven Hill product. I remember back in the day when I tried that first, I needed to go into the sink and I put a few drops of water in it. And if that's still too hot, maybe a few more drops of water in it, just to dilute it down enough to where it opens it up, it takes that heat off of there, and then you can actually drink it. And then over time, you become a complete alcoholic, and you can drink it straight up.
Right.
So
when you say it opens it up, what do you mean by that?
That's a good question. I think when you first pour it in there, you get a lot of ethanol. You smell that, you taste it. It's that heat, it's that hug that you get when you put a few drops in there. For me, at least, I feel like it actually makes the bourbon sweeter a lot of times. It opens up certain notes that you didn't get. So what I would recommend is taking a sip of the bourbon, kind of assess it, see what you think. If it's hot, if it's anything else, that's when you go and you put a few drops in it. Take another sip of it, smell it. And I'm telling you, after even just 2 or 3 drops of water, and I mean drops, it changes everything.
But coming full circle, if you're just kind of a bourbon noob and you're just getting into it, I recommend starting with a lower proof bourbon. The other tip for you too is, even if you've been drinking bourbon for a while, when you get together with some buddies to drink bourbon and you have a wide array of bottles sitting out on the shelf or on the table or wherever it is, start with your first pour being maybe something a little bit on the lower proof side. This does what's called priming your palate.
You don't want to wreck it right off the bat.
Yeah, and if you went in straight in and poured something really high proof, even somebody who is accustomed to regularly drinking really high proof bourbon, even the experienced bourbon drinkers know that they're going to burn up their palate to where they won't be able to taste some of the intricacies of the bourbon if they pour something really high proof in the beginning.
Yep.
And so that's probably my biggest tip of when you go drink at somebody's house. Start with something low proof.
Yep. All right, here we go. That's next.
That's
MGP.
a whole nother section that we can talk about.
What the hell is MGP?
Does
MGP actually stand for anything?
Yeah, it stands for Miller Grain Products. It's somebody Grain Products, like somebody's last name, Grain Products. Yeah.
I'm asking because I truly don't know.
So yeah, it stands.
You're going to hear this a lot, though. I mean, MGP is in so many things. There are so many brands that are out there that you think are their own distiller, and they've aged it for the past 9 years. That's not the case. There is a gigantic distillery in Indiana, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Indiana, that has tons of barrels that anyone that's starting off in bourbon says, you know what, I'm going to go to MGP, I'm going to pick out some of their barrels, and I'm going to start my brand with those, and eventually by the time my stuff gets to the point where I can actually sell it.
Midwest Grain Products.
Midwest Grain Products, there it is. That's when they switch it out. So they no longer buy the stuff from MGP, they begin using their own stuff. Great example if you're, again, from the Middle Tennessee area, like the Chattanooga whiskey, all of that stuff now is starting to switch into their own stuff, but they've been sourcing MGP ever since then.
The main reason we're talking about MGP is because inevitably you're going to be in an environment, if you're in bourbon, and someone is going to say, oh, is that MGP sourced?
Correct.
And you're going to remember this moment. We're Chip and Travis. We're getting drunk in his basement. Essentially, how bourbon continues to grow is companies like MGP.
What else do you want to talk about? You want to talk about, personally, I think we should talk about...
What's your biggest... Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I want to hear what you're going to say now.
I feel like I want to hear what you should say.
Oh, I even saw yours and stole it.
I was going to say, I want to talk about the fact that your palate changes. I think when I was a bourbon noob, I think back, I was just obsessed with trying to buy as many bottles as possible and hide them for my wife and, put them all over the place.
Key.
Because it's a whole thing about
We could do a whole episode just on where to hide stuff.
So I guess the thing that I figured out right off the bat in the first 6 months is you're buying all these bottles and you're like, oh my God, this is my favorite bottle. This is the best thing in the whole world. And you drink about like a fourth of the bottle, and then you try this, you try a rye, you try a wheat, you're trying all these different things, And these are all usually like 80 to 90 proof bourbons. And then about after 4 or 5 months, it starts shifting and you're like, man, I really like this. And you go back to, I'll be honest, for me, it was Woodford Reserve Double Oak. Double Oak for me was the entry point for bourbon to me. God, I love Double Oak. I loved it so much. Every bar I'd go to, I'd find that. Now I go back to that, and it does not hit me. And that was my favorite bourbon in the world. I think as you continue on and you try to define exactly what you like, you start realizing the bourbons that were your favorite might not be your favorite anymore. So keep that in mind, is that as you're buying bourbons and you're like, you know what, Travis, I'm never, ever going to drink a bottle of Bond. That's just too hot. Or I'm never going to do a barrel proof. That's way too hot. I'm telling you, over time, it will change. It does change.
Well, the other thing, too, is on the contrary, it changes the other way, too. The stuff that early on that I tried, I really didn't like. Now that I've had a bunch of other different stuff, I've revisited and I've tried to have an open mind about it, or I've even been blinded on it, and I've gone back and go, I really like this. What is it? And they tell me, I go, wait a second, I don't like that. I don't like rye. Because early on I said, I don't like rye. It's too spicy. We've talked about palate.
Smell your bourbon.
Smell
whatever
your
number
bourbon.
this is.
You know, like 76.3% of all your taste comes from smell. That is a complete.
Where did that stat come from?
I just made it up.
I was like, there's no way that's accurate.
It is true that the majority of your sense of taste comes from smell. So if you are just holding your nose and drinking it, you're just not going to get the same taste. Conversely, if you have something that smells really bad, it may not taste as good because it smells so bad.
Yep.
Don't stick your nose down in here and inhale huge. You're going to burn your nostrils up bad.
True. Keep your mouth open. That's another thing.
Keep your mouth open.
If you close your mouth, you're not getting the full thing. So open your mouth, smell.
And don't necessarily like inhale either.
Right.
Sometimes you can just like, and I'll go one nostril, I'll go the other nostril. This is pretentious as fuck right now, but
you kind of sound like a diva.
I do sound like an ass.
Is actually get online and look up like a bourbon, kind of like a tasting chart, you know, like all the different notes and things that.
Like it's kind of cool. In my car.
Yeah, it's actually really nice. Like you kind of go through all like the spicy and sweet, and you kind of like understand, like as you're looking at it and you're tasting it, you're like, oh, that is kind of what I'm thinking. So sometimes it's hard to put it together in your head, but when you have that chart, it actually does help a lot. Yeah. Let's talk about Kentucky bourbon versus everything else. So you got Indiana, you got Tennessee, you've got all Texas. You got a lot of bourbon in Texas.
Okay.
What's the difference between Kentucky bourbon? Now, anybody that's watching this from Kentucky, like, well, Kentucky's the only bourbon. Here's the thing. I'm with you. I like Kentucky bourbon, and I would say the majority of the ones that I like, my favorites, are probably from Kentucky. But what are the differences between Kentucky versus everything else?
The big difference is that most of the distilleries in Kentucky kind of fall on that longitudinal line that has the hottest hots and the coldest colds, the biggest difference in temperature.
Expansion, contraction within the wood.
And for the longest amounts of time.
Yes.
So somewhere like Texas, they're doing bourbon.
Yep.
They're doing whiskey.
But it's hot.
It's hot.
It's hot for most of the year.
Yeah, and you don't get a ton of the cold, which means
Correct.
You don't get a ton of
It's not contracting.
It's not being contracted where it's having to be forced back out of the wood.
Correct.
But there's a lot of evaporation, which leads for really high ABV, or alcohol by volume, really high proof bourbon coming out, or really high.
But also the water source is a big thing too.
Yeah, sure, yeah. So your water source in Kentucky, most of Kentucky is on like limestone beds. You go to different distilleries, and a lot of them have their own water source.
It doesn't necessarily mean that other ones are not as good. It's just different.
Don't be the guy that brings a Blanton's bottle to the Willet tasting.
It's okay if you do, if the one time you're learning. God, I mean, we even got into like the Blantons.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to a tasting with a bunch of guys that are really into bourbon, don't go in the liquor store and buy the cheapest bottle of bourbon you can find.
There's that. And here's the thing. I think it's important to note too, like, you don't have to have the best bottle when you're going to a tasting. It's okay. Like, people understand. You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like when I went into like tastings to begin with, and I didn't have a whole lot of stuff, I kind of freaked out about that. Like, are they gonna judge me? It's okay. You know what? If you had a store pick Blanton's and you want to take that to thing, that's great. All right, so that covers that. All right, we got to end this episode real quick. If you're a bourbon noob, you're gonna get there. Just like anybody else. You're gonna try some stuff. You're gonna learn. You're gonna go to some tastings. You're gonna figure this out. You're not expected to know everything. It's okay, truly. And there are a lot of really good people out there that will happily tell you what they think and help you with this process. And they'll probably just share this video with you too. And that's what you're going to end up doing, is just watching this video. I think that pretty much wraps this up.
I think so.
If you got any questions, just hit us up. Travis Chip. Another freaking bourbon show.
Another freaking bourbon show. You can put my social down here. I don't care. You can put Chip Sips.
I'm not going to put Chip Sips in there.
Chip Sips at Instagram.gmail.com.
I'm not going to promote you.
AOL.com.
I'm not promoting you. I'm not going to put this on there.